Okay, let's do this so we can get you out to lunch here. Thank you for joining. My name is Marcos Hernandez. I'm a principal engineer with the NSX team at VMware. And I've also been supporting OpenStack for the past 4 years at VMware. And I have the pleasure to be doing this presentation with Chris McDermott. We've been working on his project for some time now. That has been really, really great. And Chris?
So I'm Chris McDermott. I'm from Foodstuffs North Island in New Zealand, infrastructure architect. And for those of you who don't know, Foodstuffs is a supermarket cooperative. And we've been on our private cloud journey and elected to go with the VIO offering, which is why I'm here today.
Excellent, excellent. So before I pass it on to Chris and give him, the time, he'll be covering the bulk of the presentation. I just wanted to set the stage and talk a little bit about OpenStack at VMware. What exactly it is that we're doing with OpenStack, why we think that this is a strategic opportunity for our company, and how we've evolved our distribution over the past couple of years. So a combination of architecture and technical content here for the next few slides, so just bear with me, and then we'll get right into the architectural discussions and the specifics of their Foodstuffs use case. Okay. OpenStack, we've had a distribution for a couple of years, and that is still news to many, many people, right? It's like, wait a minute, VMware doing OpenStack? It doesn't make any sense. I thought VMware competed against OpenStack, and that could not be more incorrect. OpenStack is very strategic to VMware, and there are a lot of market drivers and market trends that put us in a great position to go after these opportunities. And at the top of the list, undeniably, is the opportunity with the telcos and the carriers. They have pretty much decided and settled on OpenStack as the next generation cloud management platform for the NFV use case. So we have a history of validated solutions in that space with vCloud Director, and it only makes sense if we have an OpenStack distribution that we can to validate solutions now using VMware integrated OpenStack. So that market opportunity is definitely huge, and it's an industry trend. I'm sure that you've attended sessions here around the NFV use case, so we'll participate in that. The other opportunity, and something that we've been saying all along, is that networking, and not just us, I mean, there are surveys confirming this, networking remains a big challenge in OpenStack. And when we talk about networking in OpenStack, I'm talking about the reference implementation in Neutron that is based on some open source components. So we replace that. We replace that with what? Obviously with NSX. And we have a couple of flavors there for NSX that integrate into our OpenStack. And the idea is that we bring stability to the networking and security services available in OpenStack with our own SDN platform, or network virtualization platform, NSX. New application footprints like Kubernetes are also in vogue, right? If you walk around and you see the sessions, this could also be like the Kubernetes summit, because everybody seems to be talking about it. And there are some good reasons for that. So we announced at VMworld Vegas a prescriptive solution called VIO Kubernetes that leverages OpenStack as the IaaS to provide a container as a service solution. We just did a session a couple of hours ago on that. So I invite you to see the recording and see what we're offering there. Also opportunities to integrate with other products in the suite. We announced with VIO 4.0, which is our shipping Ocado release, an integration with vRealize automation to overlay, among other things, governance on top of OpenStack, because that is largely missing as part of the core offering of OpenStack. And then with our parent company, Dell EMC, we're also working on fully validated designs that not only leverage the VMware software stack, but they work on the Dell EMC hardware stack. And there is a lot of opportunity there with hyperconverge. So we're also exploring that. So again, VMware is committed to OpenStack. We've increased our headcount, and we've increased our headcount where that increase matters, which is in our engineering ranks. So we're very committed to OpenStack, and we'll continue to be invested in OpenStack. Okay, here's the timeline. Since we formally announced, even though we've been doing internally at VMware, we've been doing OpenStack for since we acquired Nicira. That is a company that largely brought NSX into VMware, we've been doing OpenStack since day one after that acquisition. ICR founded Quantum, which was later renamed as Neutron. So we inherited all that OpenStack expertise, and we, instead of kill it, we decided to explore it and enhance it. And then in Q1 of 2015, we announced our first commercial version of VMware Integrated OpenStack based on Icehouse. And then after that, well, you can see it as well as I can tell it. You can see the timeline here. We have been skipping every other release. There are some very good reasons for that. I won't get into the drivers behind that decision, but it has to do with the stability of OpenStack, the fact that doing bleeding edge OpenStack may not necessarily be a good idea for production deployment. And given that our main goal is to mitigate risk in an OpenStack deployment, make lifecycle management of OpenStack something that is predictable, we've been very careful about how we package VIO. And the trend as of right now is to skip every other release. So we are a little behind for a while, and then we catch up. We're a little behind, and we catch up. And that seems to be working with our customer base. And they may not necessarily have the appetite to upgrade their OpenStack cloud every 6 months. Which brings us to VIO 4.0. This is our shipping GA release as of right now, announced at VMworld Vegas. Around this diagram, you see some of the highlights in terms of features and capabilities. NFV services that are available in OpenStack are now available in VIO 4.0. We also, as I mentioned, announced Kubernetes as a service solution that uses OpenStack as a common IaaS framework. And then another big one is the support for multiple vCenters. We're seeing with our larger customers that when you do this right, these OpenStack clouds tend to grow very quickly. We have customers that in a matter of months went from 0 to thousands of VMs, and now we need to think about scalability. So adding more compute capacity, and our compute manager is vCenter, is something that we've been wanting to do for a long time, and we finally deliver on that in 4.0. Okay, so that is the marketing architecture part. Let's get a little bit more technical, and let me go over. I'm going to try to build out the architecture, starting with the physical components, which we need to run OpenStack. And then I'm going to pass it on to Chris so he can tell us how they're consuming the OpenStack APIs in their use case. But at VMware, we sell software, we don't sell hardware, right? So we need hardware to run. And it all starts with a capable, available network. And this will support all the NSX services. That network is shown here on the slide. What I always say is that if the physical network is crap, the virtual networks of NSX are going to be vCrap. So we need very available, very redundant, highly available, high bandwidth. Give me the MTU that I need to support VXLAN overlays, and we're off to the races. Around that network, connected to a top of rack, you have your compute capacity and your storage capacity. That's your x86 edge footprint, right? Then, obviously, you need to be running, for VMware Integrated OpenStack, you need to be running ESXi, you need to be running vSphere. That is the only compute endpoint that we support for Nova in OpenStack. And you also need, for NSX, you need a VDS as a common framework. So now you have your physical infrastructure for compute, network, and storage. You have your virtual infrastructure with vSphere and NSX. So the next step is to tie everything together, or all the clusters participating in this domain, in this environment, need to be added to what we define in NSX as a transport zone. I mentioned this because you have it in one of your slides, so I just wanted to introduce the concept. A transport zone in NSX defines the diameter of your overlays. So clusters that are hosting VMs that need to be layer 2 adjacent via a VXLAN overlay need to be part of the same transport zone. It is not a security boundary. It is a logical boundary for aggregating VTEPs in our VXLAN implementation. And once you have virtual compute, virtual networking, you can deploy on top of that topologies using OpenStack. So OpenStack will drive the consumption using a standard OpenStack construct, the consumption of these different topologies, overlapping IPs, no NAT, et cetera, load balancing, et cetera. These topologies can be completely independent and isolated. in our OpenStack or any OpenStack implementation, specifically in VIO. This is another representation of that same architecture. The thing to remember here is that the red box is OpenStack, okay? OpenStack does not equal KVM. That is something that has to be understood. KVM just happens to be the free reference implementation that the developers use to write APIs and whatnot. But OpenStack is I see it as an operating system for your cloud where the endpoints are replaceable. And you connect to those endpoints, to those peripherals, in the same way you connect peripherals in your computer. You use plugins and drivers, right? So in the case of VMware Integrated OpenStack, the key is the I in the name of the product. Is the integration, or the integrated part. We integrate a Nova plugin that points to vSphere for instantiation of compute. We provide a Neutron plugin, and there are a few versions of that plugin based on the NSX edition that connects Neutron to our SDN backend. And then Cinder and Glance connect to vCenter using a VMDK driver. These drivers and plugins are part of the VIO, VMware Integrated OpenStack product, but they're also upstream independently. Theoretically, you can just get them and use somebody else's OpenStack, and we have customers doing that because we also partner with OpenStack vendors out there in the market, and then they use VMware technology underneath, but replace the OpenStack layer with a different implementation. VIO, every VIO customer southbound or down below that red box is identical in our implementation. And when I say identical, is that the whole point about doing all this is to avoid snowflakes. So we publish a set of best practices on how to configure the underlying infrastructure to deploy OpenStack in a predictable and supportable manner. But northbound of the red box, or above the red box, we express native OpenStack APIs. So this is not an OpenStack-like implementation of OpenStack. This is OpenStack. Somebody or some automation tool or some human consuming the OpenStack APIs is not necessarily going to know that this is a VMware-specific implementation of OpenStack. We're DevCore compliant. That means that we satisfy the minimum set of APIs that are normalized by that program. So that is the architecture. And then at the bottom right, we have the day two operations. We have either integration of compatibility with our visibility tools. One that is not added there, I need to update this slide, is VRNI. Given that they didn't support overlapping IPs, which is a very common use case in OpenStack, I did not put it on this slide. But now that they do, we're also going to add it here. So again, the blue boxes represent the VMware products and the different solutions and different tools that could be consuming the APIs. And this is this is the architecture that we deliver for Foodstuff. And now, Chris, if you want to take us through your use case, that would be great.
I'll try. Excuse me. So I just wanted to start with a bit of a background because I'm sure a lot of you don't actually know who Foodstuffs North Island are. Like I said at the start, we're the largest supermarket cooperative in New Zealand. We have, I think it's 330 stores from mainstream supermarkets, budget supermarkets, wholesale, and corner stores. We also operate distribution, so the supply chain. We have our own transport company. And then where I come from is a support centre where there's about 1,700 staff, I think it is, supporting all of the stores. We've been around for 95 years, so we're not new to the supermarket game. Founded in Auckland in 1922, I think it was, and going strong. I think we've got about 60% market share. But that's enough about the company, because you guys want to hear how we're actually using OpenStack. The background behind our private cloud initiative, it's spawned from our online, our e-commerce initiative, and I mean, online shopping isn't a new thing, and yes, we are a little bit late to the game, we're 19 years behind our main competitor. But the good thing about that, if there is a good thing, is the fact that we've been able to leverage modern approaches to delivering an online store. And our online store is based in the public cloud. We have a mobile application which talks to APIs in the public cloud where we're running microservices. So we've got Kubernetes Some examples I've got on the board there are the login service, the product data, where it pulls the product for a specific store depending on where you are located in New Zealand, pricing data, basket calculation, time slots. So those are examples of different sorts of APIs that we've got there, process and data APIs. How does that relate to our on-premise? Well, that was our first exposure to using Kubernetes in a production environment, and it works well. It gives us scalability. We then need to have something similar on-premise. Like, I'm not talking about moving our online e-commerce on-premise, but we're talking about leveraging the same technology on-premise as we are in the cloud. So it brings me to this slide here, which talks about, yeah, we're on the right one. Talks about how our integration is working today, or was working up until recently, I should say. We have, for example, our back-end system and our transport management system, and they need to integrate. And rather than going and creating custom code in those applications to integrate them, we've decided to leverage microservices to do that, to act as adapters for us. The problem we have in New Zealand is the public cloud offerings don't have data centers in New Zealand. And here I have a physical blade enclosure with some hypervisors and some physical servers, and some of them are running our back-end system and some of them are running our transport or our warehouse management systems, and they need to integrate to each other. And we've gone, well, we're going to use services, so we now have to connect via our services in the public cloud, which are here in Australia, which isn't that great when we're based in New Zealand and the servers are sitting next to each other. Also, we see ourselves as a bit of a critical provider because in an event, a natural event or anything that could cause disruption, people still need to eat. And we're 60% market share, we're delivering food to consumers, and people are always going to need us, or need food, shall we say. So that brought us to the realization that we actually need to investigate an option to deliver an on-premise offering for the same functionality. So what we have done is we've taken the skill sets and the technology that we had, went out to market to find an offering that's going to work for us, and we landed with VIO in this case. So we already had the licensing that we needed to run the underlying virtual infrastructure. And working with Marcus and the team, we were able to stand up a private cloud on top of that infrastructure to deliver us our Kubernetes clusters and our microservices in the pods. This has now given us the ability to integrate internally, and we're still leveraging the public cloud offering through the on-premise integration layer to the public cloud integration layer for anything external. So that might be external logistics companies, or it might be a supplier that we need to for stock ordering or something along those lines. The beauty of using OpenStack for this is it's given us the ability to take our code from the public cloud, our infrastructure as code. With a little bit of translation, we've been able to then deploy on-premise in our OpenStack environment using 90% of the code. We actually have one set of code which we use for on-premise and for public cloud. And that brings me down to where we have been, I don't know, sort of paving the way about how we do the infrastructure. Now, we have started off with a set of requirements. Obviously, we needed the private cloud functionality and software defined data center with.
You misspelled data center.
I spelled it right. Thank you. Yeah. So. Yeah, you just throw me off like that. Awesome. How many in the room think that I spelled data center wrong? You know, just, yeah, see, you're the minority here. I know. Yeah. So we had some requirements. I mean, I like to keep things simple. And one of those requirements was having like a single management plane. But we do have a requirement to have multiple availability zones. And those availability zones that we're using are geographically separated. And then I guess that brings us down to that bottom point there about leveraging in-house skills that we already have. And that means the VMware stack, we've got experienced engineers in that place. We also have a DevOps team And the thing with VIO is it's given us the ability to have a clear demarcation about who looks after what, because, I mean, I'm sure most of you know that there can be a bit of an argument about, no, I'm not looking after that, that's your problem and so forth. And we've been able to address that very easily with the use of this platform. And the bottom point there is it's enterprise-grade support that we're receiving, and yeah, I won't dwell on that too much. I'm just slowing down because I think I'm going too fast.
No, we're going to leave enough time for Q&A. So hopefully think about some questions that you want to ask after we're done here.
And I've probably missed something, so I'm happy to talk to people afterwards as well. This is actually the last slide that I've got. This is the physical architecture about how we delivered the single management instance, or management plane. And that management plane includes our NSX controllers, it includes our vCenter, and it includes the OpenStack management plane as well. So the way we've done this is leveraging VMware's product suite. We have deployed a vSAN using vSAN 6.6, which has given us the ability to create a metro cluster with 2 fault domains. I should probably go back to that last slide, it shows it a little bit better. So that the top piece there, we've got vSAN nodes that reside in our geographic location A, and then we've got ours in B, and there's about, let's say a couple of 100 kilometres between those 2 data centres. Our round trip time's fast enough for us to provide that high availability across both sites, which means we're not nesting OpenStack instances, we just have one set of APIs, and it keeps it simple. And then we go down to our compute clusters, which are traditional vSphere data center clusters. And it is as simple as that. They are just there. We create the compute node in VIO, and it creates a compute node for each cluster. We don't have to worry about the HA, the instance HA inside those clusters, because that's taken care of by vSphere DRS and vMotion if we need to do host maintenance and things like that. So as far as OpenStack's concerned, we've got 2 compute nodes, they're in 2 different AZs, and then on top of that, we've also got 2 Neutron AZs as well, so that we can deploy in either side. I kind of brushed over that, but that bit's really cool. The fact that we've been able to have separate virtual distributed switches with a Neutron AZ in both sites, and actually making that work, like for me, might sound a little bit, that was like, yeah, that was a win, because that was probably, networking in OpenStack isn't the easiest, and to actually be able to do what we need to do with it and do it well has been makes me feel
Yeah,
good.
we actually, a lot of the enhancements that we added in VIO 4 for Neutron ACs, which we supported in previous version of OpenStack, but the ACs were limited to resource pools inside of the edge clusters. If you're familiar with the NSX architecture, we prefer that you put the routers and load balancers and the HCP service and distributed routers that we leverage in OpenStack. We prefer that you put that in dedicated edge clusters, and it used to be that those edge clusters, the Neutron ACs could only leverage one edge cluster, and then the only way to create some separation was with resource pools inside of those edge clusters. So Chris looked at that and said, you know what, that is not going to give us the redundancy that we need. So we make a couple of changes where we added support for a collapsed compute and edge cluster, and in doing so, we indirectly also supported or added support for multiple edge clusters. So now when Neutron availability zones are defined in a VIO architecture that is using NSX as a backend, you can have dedicated edge clusters, and we schedule on those clusters dedicated metadata proxies, dedicated routers, and the HCP services to serve whatever application that invokes that Neutron AC. The whole point of ACs in OpenStack is to express those ACs as services in the API, so developers or tools can have a notion of fault domain. So that was a feature that we added for them. Just a little bit of a shameless plug there.
Yeah. I think that's. I think I've covered everything that I wanted to cover, and I mean, I'm happy to go to questions unless there's more that you wanted to
No.
to address.
Let's before I have some questions, but before we do that, I mean, do you have any questions? I think the audience is small enough where we can keep it to conversation. So you have some questions, that would be great. Please.
Yeah, I just want to hear a bit more about what benefits you got from OpenStack. I know that some of the infrastructure as code stuff you were talking about before, which is quite interesting, but what else have you kind of gained from putting OpenStack on this?
Can you repeat the question for the recording?
Can you repeat the question for the recording?
The question is, what are the benefits that you're deriving from OpenStack? Why OpenStack?
Yeah.
And so you explained that you're using infrastructure as code that was repurposed from public cloud with minimal changes and restating the intellectual property. But why? Why the OpenStack APIs and why OpenStack?
I guess, the main reason we went with OpenStack was because we could use the troposphere code that we already had. I mean, that was the driving force behind it. And it works. Like we have been able to prove, we've been able to use our code and deliver exactly what we've done within reason. Obviously on-prem, the networking infrastructure is different to how the public cloud does it, but it's worked. What other benefits we've got from it? We're still quite early on our journey, and so at this stage it is specifically around the microservices and the integration, but that's not to say that we're not investigating leveraging other parts of it, making it giving developers the ability to deploy within a quota and number of instances and things like that, because that's something we haven't done very well in the past, because you go, I want a VM, and you go to ops and say, can I have a VM so I can do some dev, and ops says no, and then you say why, and they say just because. And so this means that we'll be able to go, all right, well, you guys have now got a quota and you've got access to deploy your own instances, the networking's all taken care of, and we can go from there. So that's something that we're definitely aiming to do today. Are we doing that? Not quite, but we're pretty close.
Did you test or try any other solution before arriving at OpenStack as your choice for private cloud?
I don't think I'm at liberty to answer. No, I can answer that one. Some would say that this is our V2 private cloud. I like to think of the previous one as the beta. We did look at another product option, and we did deploy it. We did buy it, and it, from the outside it looked good, but we didn't. The problem we had with our previous attempt is we didn't have buy-in. And with this, we've actually been able to, but we've been able to leverage what we're already doing. Whereas when we previously attempted it, the cloud initiative that we had was still quite in its infancy, and now we've developed, and we're actually living in there. So the second attempt worked because we could prove, hey, this is what we've done.
Interestingly enough, I mean that is a trend that we see with customers. Not all of them, but most of them. VMware integrated OpenStack and all the underlying infrastructure that we leverage from OpenStack. We tend to do better when we go second in a cloud project with customers. We fare a little better with customers that maybe tried a different IaaS technology, or maybe somebody else's OpenStack. They see the value, they understand, but they perhaps are not able to deploy it or maintain it. I think installing OpenStack has, for the most part, been addressed and resolved. It's keeping the lights on, what seems to be a challenge with most OpenStack implementations. So when they look at VIO, they're like, okay, I can understand that. At the end of the day, it's VMs. We leverage the operational model of a VM. So we tend to do better with customers that have tried something else and did not give up on OpenStack, and then looked at our product. So it sounds like that was your experience.
That's totally what happened. Yeah.
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 So another question here.
What percentage of admin is done in vCenter versus Horizon? Like, what kind of split are you guys doing? Like, how much do you do in vCenter? How much do you do in Horizon? And do you find that having two management interfaces now is a bit more confusing from an ops perspective?
Yeah, the question is, for the recording, how much time do you spend in vCenter directly versus Horizon, for example, which is the UI in OpenStack, and having two brains driving the same body, is that cost a cause for concern or issues?
For us, it's not, because we've got our the infrastructure, the virtual infrastructure piece is managed by our operations team, and they know vCenter and they live in there. The people who are using Horizon at the moment, in fact, we're not really using Horizon, we're using the APIs. The only time we go into Horizon is to create a new project or potentially stand up a unique router or something like that. The rest of it we're doing through code, so that lives in the DevOps space. So has it added management? Not from a virtual infrastructure perspective, not from the hypervisor and the compute management. If you're asking, has it added more because we're doing this cloud stuff? Well, yes, it has, because we're doing something new now. It's something we weren't doing before, but if we didn't have this, we wouldn't be able to do it. So we actually, as part of our cloud journey, we didn't have, up until relatively recently, we didn't have DevOps. I mean, we were a Windows and Wintel, everything was that, and Ops looked after everything. So we actually employed a new team to take over the DevOps piece, and they look after that. So the Ops guys don't see any change. They just see new hardware, and they provision it and do it. Well, it depends, because we still use vCenter for our legacy, our traditional, I shouldn't say legacy, our traditional applications, but anything to do with the OpenStack instances, Kubernetes and pods and things like that, that's all OpenStack.
Yeah,
So-
we recommend, once OpenStack is overlaid on top of the SDDC, direct access to all these different managers, whether we're talking vCenter, NSX Manager, or what have you, for the most part becomes a read-only experience where for troubleshooting, operations, and all that. That is not to say that we don't allow certain out-of-band operations. But I would argue that if you find yourself selecting VIO or whatever, right, and then bypassing the OpenStack layer to do direct things on top of the infrastructure, maybe you didn't pick the right abstraction layer, right? The whole point of cloud is to create a finite set of permutations, and that is what you provide. So a good example, and this, again, it's a frequently asked question, actually, the one that you're asking. So let me just go on record. A good example of that is that I provide is with NSX. For the most part, for the longest time, Neutron did not support, for example, dynamic routing. They finally added BGP in livery, and but NSX as a platform has always supported BGP since day one. However, when you put Neutron on top of NSX, you cannot, because there's no way for you, or there was no way, now we have it, but there was no way to consume BGP. It doesn't really matter if the underlying platform supports it or not, if your cloud cannot understand it or cannot consume it. So think about the abstraction as the least common denominator for consuming features. So that is why when we do POCs, when we do engagements, 90% of the time we talk about opening your eyes and making sure that you go into this with a very good understanding of what OpenStack is and what is not. And in many cases, I find myself doing what I call negative positioning, which is talking people out of using OpenStack. Right? It's like, no, it's not a good fit for you. So that would be just a general comment about OpenStack, because as you may or may not know, OpenStack is not really that good in reconciling what the infrastructure has versus what OpenStack thinks the infrastructure has. OpenStack is a single source of truth for the most part. So if you do stuff out of band and you do rogue operations, you may end up breaking the integration. So that is just, and I'm sure that throughout your career, you've seen many solutions like that, where you add abstraction, right, to provide simplicity, well, you give up flexibility. There's no free lunch here. Any other question? Please.
Any issues with troubleshooting, pinpointing what's a fault, whether it's an OpenStack or a VMware issue?
The question is, have you had any issues when you do troubleshooting and operations in, determining, is it OpenStack's fault or is it a problem with VMware? You have some nice nice battle wounds here. So
we do
talk about that.
We do. That's a good question, and it's an interesting one, because when you look at the way that it's done with VIO, the plugins talk to the to vCenter, for example, for Cinder and instances, and it talks to NSX for Neutron, and it's like, is the problem with the plugin? Is the problem with the control plane above that, or or is it somewhere else? I mean, a lot of the problems, I shouldn't say it like that because it sounds like we've had a lot. I mean, there's been a few because it is new for us, and we adopted VIO 4.0, literally deployed it the day that it was available for down. In fact, before that, even when we were proof of concepting it. Yeah, no, but we put it into production pretty quickly after it was released. And I say pretty quickly, but there were some hurdles because it is a new product. And the problems that we did have, I'll be honest, they were more VMware-related problems than OpenStack. And it was things like the collapsed compute and edge, and having the edge residing in a different data center, to the vSphere data center, to the management cluster, and things like that. And from that, I mean, we worked really closely with the developers for VIO and with Marcus and his colleagues around getting through it. And the best thing that we had is we had response within, like, one example that we had was that the collapsed edge, and we did have a response and a patch within 24 hours. But yes, it did sit in that layer. But I think with anything that is this complex, because it is complex, you're going to have challenges. And the other thing is we've led the way with the stretched management cluster, and to the point where it's like, cool, we love what you're doing. VMware saying we love what you're doing, and we support what you're doing. And so there were things that hadn't been, I guess, fully run through.
Yeah, the stretch management cluster is not something that we had validated internally. So once they expressed interest in doing that, we went ahead and ran that through our QA and QE teams, and we saw an opportunity there to claim multi-site support from a geographical perspective without necessarily having true multi-site with multiple vCenters and whatnot, and that worked and is working now. We officially support it. Be wary of anybody, any vendor, anybody claiming that this stuff is just going to work. Things are going to break. That is the only guarantee that I can give you. Things are going to break, and it is all about how do you figure out that something is broken, how do you recover from that, and how do you patch OpenStack. So we gave Chris a tarball patch through the lifecycle management tool that we provide in OpenStack, and it was patched and it was up and running. So I think
sorry, I want to cut you off,
please.
Because this is important. I think the key here is, like what Marcus is saying, is that we do have, like with anything, there's going to be issues. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be, we're not even talking about OpenStack. But the key for me is that we had that support, and we had the rapid response, or we have it. When we log a ticket, I mean, VMware typically are okay at responding in a timely manner, but these guys they were onto it straight away. And that for us was key. That validated that we made the right decision to go with VIO, because if something went wrong, they were onto it and we were getting it fixed within a day or two. So
awesome. Any other question? I think we have time for one more question, or maybe two.
Was there just kind of expanding on the last question around the issues with VMware and OpenStack? You mentioned before you've got your operations team look after VMware infrastructure, very skilled in that kind of area. You mentioned the DevOps team, or presumably looking after the OpenStack side of things. Is there much of an issue with the communication channels between those two?
Yeah.
The culture?
Yeah. The question is, it sounds going by your description of the organization, it sounds that you have a little bit of a silo there between DevOps and Ops. When they have to interact and work together, are there issues?
Well, yeah, thanks. I think we're done with questions. No.
Maybe if you don't mind, maybe we can take it out.
It is a good question, though. And yeah, can we talk afterwards about that one? Because I could probably go on for ages.
And then the last question?
I was just going to ask, so you said you had VMware skills in-house already. How much additional upskilling was required for your ops teams to do like the OpenStack components? Did you have any additional training?
That's a good question. Yeah, the question is, okay, you have VMware expertise. How painful was it to acquire OpenStack skills to support VIO? That's an excellent question.
Yeah, I guess if we break it down and we talk about deployment deployment was pretty straightforward. It's an OVA, and then plugin registers with vCenter. You use the plugin. We've got a pre-configured JSON file for the deployment and run through, and it deploys. That part of it was easy, and any VMware administrator can do that, as long as you've got the underlying infrastructure already in place, the NSX, the vCenter, and everything configured. For the OpenStack piece, that was new. That was entirely new. We, I guess the upskilling in that has just been running through it, just doing it. But we did have the skills in our DevOps team already from the public cloud, and those skills are pretty much fully transferable to what we're doing in OpenStack. So I guess the difference is that we've had to run through with them is around Neutron, really. That's the biggest difference, is how the DevOps guys use the code to deploy a router and subnets and networks. But all in all, it's networking. It's not really that much different. It's just understanding what you can plug in where, virtually plug in where. So yeah, we haven't had, I guess to answer that in a couple of words, we haven't had to do a lot of upskilling, especially in that VMware space.
Excellent. Chris, I want to thank you for your time, your partnership. Hopefully we can continue to collaborate together. We're done, mate. Let's go
Cool.
grab a beer.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.